there's two pieces to any vaccination, right? The first is the antigen, making sure that you got the right bugs in the bottle. The other half of that injection is also the adjuvant. This is the engine that powers the vaccine, right? This is what gets the pig to respond to it and start to elicit that immune response that we're looking for. Again, here's the beauty of an autogenous program is we have some flexibility in what we can use. And based on what's going on in the herds that people are working with, there's different options that are out there. Some of these are better designed to get a stronger response out of viral vaccines. There's many, many different adjuvants out there in the world that are available. And finding one that works well with viral antigens in particular can be immensely critical in the success of a program.
Hi, welcome to our latest edition of Swine Podcast. I'm Jerry Purvis, your host. Today, we're excited to have two special guests. Today, we have Dr. Steve Tousignant, Director of Swine Business Units for Vaccinova, and Dr. Daniel Gascho, Consulting Vet with 4-Star Vet Services. Guys, welcome to our podcast today. Glad to have you today. Tell a little bit about yourself, let our viewers know. So just take a few minutes and just give us a little brief history of how you got to where you're at.
Sure. As Jerry said, my name is Steve Tousignant. I'm a veterinary graduate to the University of Minnesota in 2011. Throughout my career, I've spent some time working in vet practice and also in industry. And my most recent position here is now with Vaccinova as the director of the Swine Business Unit, and I'm responsible for our sales and technical teams.
Yeah, I'm Daniel Gascho, originally from Indiana, went to Purdue for undergrad and vet school. Spent some time externing around the country, spent some time at Iowa State and some other places. Ended up actually based back out of Indiana. We're partner of 4-Star and cover most of the Eastern Midwest, we like to say. And I'm kind of one of those nerdy guys who enjoys the numbers, return on investment and little pennies here or there is what drew me to the commercial swine side.
Well, very good. I think we've got a really pertinent topic today that we want to dive into, swine influenza. And I think it's an area where we maybe it nickels and dimes us. And to your Daniel's point, there's a good return if we can manage that. We had several podcasts, and today we want to we've talked about the background of influenza and kind of the technicals about it, but maybe dive in today of what are some strategies that producers can use to manage this in the herd. And it's something that, every herd probably faces every year. So during fall or winter. So I guess just start out, maybe Daniel, what are some of your experiences that you've had with influenza?
Yeah, I think as you alluded to, Jerry, everybody has probably dealt with or had flu at some point. And I think that's actually part of the problem. In my opinion, when we start talking about flu, and maybe over the last 5 or 10 years, flu has become a bigger topic, not because it's new, but I think part of it is if you've got a bad PRRS break or you've got a bad PED break, or we're discussing African swine fever, all of these big hot topics, flu kind of gets forgot about, not because it's not important, but because it's maybe slightly less impactful than all these big things. And the fact that it's always been around, and historically, maybe we didn't have the best understanding or the best tools. And so I liken it to strep where, oh yeah, it's just one of those things that's normal. We just always deal with. And I think it's time we're better able to actually do something about it now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's almost like we're not seeing a lot of mortality with it, and maybe we've got other bigger rocks that we try to worry about that's taking forefront. But definitely something that, as you said, is something we're going to face, all of us, at some point or another. But well, very good. So what are some of maybe let's talk a little bit about what are some of the strategies you guys have developed and as programs that you use with your customers, clients?
I get so excited about flu and ways we approach things and what we do and like to share it that I tend to come across as having flu figured out, which is certainly not correct. And, I give examples of the way we do things, but when I say we, it's in that specific scenario. There's certainly not a silver bullet answer that, we discovered the fix for flu, because that's not how flu works. But I think one of the key things with flu is the way you generate maternal antibodies, and that can be a good or a bad thing. If you have flu at the sow farm level, but maybe where the pigs are weaning to, they're not going to be exposed to flu, at least as far as not a routine flu exposure, then we can use flu vaccines pre-farrow, which not only protects the sow herd, she doesn't really care if she gets a pre-farrow or quarterly blanket or how you use a flu vaccine, but to intentionally put it pre-farrow, to intentionally cause maternal antibodies, to at least get those pigs off the sow farm negative and have some protection through the first part of the nursery, can sometimes be on purpose. But then that immediately flips back on its head if we want to vaccinate specifically the downstream pigs. Maybe they're exposed to something different than the sow farm. Well, then we don't want that maternal antibody interference messing with our vaccine. So it just boils down to the specific scenario. Where's the threat? Where's the exposure? Where's the risk? As a producer, which part of the equation are you? Are you everything? Farrow to finish? Are you the sow farm? Are you the buyer? And so it's hard to put a correct way to, approach flu, because every situation is so different.
So I guess what I'm hearing is it really depends on the producer, and it could be totally different from one producer to another. What plan that you use and decide in your vaccination.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that if you just started with a blank slate, just no preconceived knowledge of local endemic flu or anything like that, I would say a starting point is most people choose to protect their sow farm even without any knowledge of a local or endemic strain, just because, large animals, obviously more value in a sow than maybe a nursery pig. They're more prone to maybe a flu break when it's really hot. For all these reasons, just similar to the human model of taking a stab at what's the most likely thing they're going to be exposed to that year and protect the sows at minimum. And then with that, you're going to get a short period of downstream protection. And then from there, you dial that in farther. We broke with the flu. Well, that's not a good match for the isolates in this vaccine. We need to change it. Or sow farm's good to go, but downstream, that finisher has a neighbor that always gives us flu. Well, then we might need to tweak something on the sow farm end against that flu, or, put vaccine into those pigs. And so there's definitely a starting point without having any other information where you can do your best guess, but definitely it's a moving target as to what's the best fit for any scenario.
Now, you mentioned, Daniel, liking the numbers, our return on investment. I think a lot of times that drives, particularly with the climate we've had in the last couple of years, with margins being where they're at. Everybody looks at cost and trying to reduce costs. So where do you think what a return on a good program would be to a producer?
Well, that's a tough question without you giving me some info on what's the challenge, what's the amount of flu pressure. If you could tell me I have a sow farm farrow to finish in a highly biosecure, off the grid bubble where we're not ever going to see flu from humans, well, then of course you don't even need flu vaccine. That's an easy answer. But then there's all this in between of, if you tell me I have a sow farm that's endemic for a flu that weans flu positive animals that struggle, well, then that's just as easy the other way. That's a guaranteed high positive ROI. So it's just like any vaccine. It's really hard to quantify the cost of risk of exposure to flu. But I would say in general, again, back to just a starting point without knowing anything else, a single dose of flu vaccine pre-farrow, each litter, I'll say, that's not counting any primer or gilt acclimation or anything like that. We're talking one dose into a sow that will get some protection in, say, 12 pigs, at least through the farrowing house, just through her colostrum, maternal antibodies into the nursery. if you could tell me there's any risk of exposure to flu, if that's all we're talking about, that's going to be a positive ROI, because we're down in the pennies, just, single dose and covering mom and all the babies. And so I'm sure Steve can say actual dollar amounts they've probably calculated, but I'll just say it's really hard to not have a positive ROI if we're starting with just kind of a minimum flu coverage protocol.
Yeah, and I would echo that too. I think, Daniel, you hit the nail right on the head. The more complex the disease situation gets, I think sometimes the more beneficial a vaccine program for something like influenza is. Sometimes I think people might have a tendency to just kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, boy, what am I going to do about flu? I've got everything else going on. And, certainly we have these situations where the vaccine is very, very helpful despite everything else, right? And so if we can eliminate pieces of the puzzle that are causing trouble to the pigs, that always moves health forward, right? So if influenza control is something that, you can manage within a herd, I think it's always beneficial to you.
I will add one thing on how do you quantify the cost of flu, is it's pretty rare in most pigs, most flows, to have true flu only. And even without PRRS or these other big ones, flu plus strep or flu plus even Bordetellus, Pastorellas, what we again think of those normal or common secondary things. It's the old saying of greater than the sum of its parts. You might have strep that costs you this much, and you have flu that costs you this much, but together they cost you this much. So quantifying the return on a flu vaccine, assuming you can minimize the flu's impact, is typically a lot bigger than just the flu's portion itself, just, those compounding other pathogens that are along with it. Just really like to get extra bad when you add some flu to the mix.
Why risk it? Your herd may have antigenic gaps that are not being covered by the products currently available. Custom-made vaccines provide a unique advantage in that they can be formulated to a herd's specific bacterial and viral needs. Choose the exact isolates, adjuvant, packaging, and size you need with Vaccinova for a vaccine formulated to your needs. Find out more by visiting us at vaccinova.us.com. That's VAXXINOVA.us.com.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is holistically, we don't have one thing that's silver bullet that's going on. We've got a multitude of things, health issues, and if we can eliminate one, we just advance the health status of that animal, and that's a positive. Just thinking nutritionally, anytime we have the immune system activated, it's a cost. We're taking nutrients and we're partitioning those nutrients for the immune system that are not going to growth or reproductive purposes. So it's a cost whether we can measure it. We know it's there, and I think that's a good point. So you mentioned a little bit gilt acclimation. So how do you maybe speak a little bit with how you manage that?
Yeah, somebody asked me about gilt acclimation. My first question is I want them to tell me what they mean by acclimation, because that's a simple word, but that means different things to different people. And so I guess I'll talk about flu specifically. On flu, we do not acclimate, I'll say, in the traditional sense of let's take actively clinically shedding animals and put them into our acclimation barn to give them the flu and build natural immunity. Or people use acclimation, they're referring to, say, fecal feedback or things like that. Flu, I believe that most of the time, if you have a flu bad enough that you need to do some level of control like that, then you don't have a good vaccine match. Flu should be able to be controlled relatively quickly on the scale of PRRS elimination or other pathogens. And so if you have a good vaccine that matches, say, a flu that's at your sow farm, without getting into the details of how we would blanket the vaccine maybe twice, there's different strategies, you can shut that down quickly enough that I think you should be able to shut that down before your next wave of gilts come in, combined with the fact that our vaccines are pretty specific against strains. We can have strong immunity against the strain that the sow farm has in case it's not 100% gone. All to get to the point to say, I'm not going to make my gilts in, say, a gilt acclimation barn be clinically ill with flu as part of the acclimation, like we might with PED or PRRS or some of these other intentional wild natural exposures. So I guess to summarize, my gilt acclimation, at least for flu, is entirely vaccine based. We're not doing inoculation of flu.
So, and that leads to maybe my next question. You mentioned diagnostics. How important is that, and how do you use that to know what exactly, how important is that when you're doing a program?
I'll talk out of both sides of my mouth here for a second. One being, flu is one of the few things that with pretty high level of confidence, the eyeball and ear test can tell you if you have flu or not. Whether it's the characteristic, it's sometimes referred to as the goose honk or the bark or the type of cough that is not going to be the same as a mycohack or even any other bacterial pneumonia. And so if we're talking just boots on the ground, day-to-day life, I want to know if I have flu or not. Yeah, I mean, if it matters as far as movement of gilts or something, of course we'll do diagnostics with oral fluids. But as far as is that flu, yes or no, it's usually not always necessary to even do advanced diagnostics. But then I'll flip to the exact opposite and say, if we have a vaccine program in place that we expect good coverage and we don't expect clinical signs, say a sow farm or pigs on the sow that are maximum immunity that we think and they are clinically ill, well, then I really quickly start suspecting we have a new flu that's outside, the isolates that might be in our vaccine, because, flu doesn't offer as good of cross protection as some vaccines, and it's fairly specific. And so in that scenario, well, we're going to get isolates, we're going to get sequences, we're going to compare to our vaccine, because I trust my protocols enough that when we see flu, something is, out of whack, for lack of a better term. It's like, shouldn't be seeing that. So then we flip to all the way down to specific HA gene sequences to compare to our vaccine and see if we need to update that. So both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, one of the things that, we help with from our end with Dr. Gascho's practice is, helping them with those sequences, right? So we've got the technology in-house in our lab to work through that with them. And they can be all the sample types, nasal swabs or some lung tissues or this kind of a thing. We oftentimes will also compare sequences with the state laboratories that they might be working with. And oftentimes, if the state lab has the actual isolate, we forward that to our laboratory, and then we can conduct some further kind of serum neutralization assays as well. So comparing the reactivity of the isolate in hand against a bank of sera that represent all of the different clades of influenza viruses out there to help and understand, does it look like the isolates in the vaccine might have some cross-reactive potential with the isolate that Daniel is pulling from the herd today. And using that information, getting that back to him and working with them and understanding, is it the appropriate time to update the vaccines, or, is this just a one-off fluke, or do we look like we've got good enough coverage, and work through the process that way with them.
Steve can probably comment on the science behind it. I will not claim to be a virologist, but obviously you can't put every isolate ever in one vaccine. We can't have 100 strain vaccine. So I'm sure there's research that says, the immune response to the number of different antigens. But just in general, if you take a stab at, say, maybe you make a vaccine with a flu specifically that this farm has struggled with in the past, and maybe you add 3 common regional variants that they might be exposed to, and you make this vaccine that has 4 or even 5 isolates in it. And if you haven't played around in the flu game, you might think, well, with 5 isolates, I mean, how much can there be left out there that won't cover? Well, just the way flu works and, H1N, all the different combinations, and then within their specific subtypes variation. We just had one earlier this year in a 5-strain vaccine with different types of flu. They became clinically ill. And I'm like, well, that's weird. Test it. It wasn't even within 85% of a match of any of the 5. So my point just being, it's impossible to throw enough in a vaccine to have good protection against everything that's out there.
Yeah, the role of really smart diagnostics in that, right, helps to kind of guide some of that decision making. Do we go through a knee-jerk reaction and make changes, or do we hang tight and just look at this potentially as a one-off event, right?
Just comparing to humans, as we get these strains that vary, may vary a little bit, but not much from season to season. So is this a little different with pigs as far as getting cross protection, even if maybe we don't have it, those strains identified?
Yeah, there's again several ways that we attempt to try to answer those questions. The beauty of an autogenous vaccine program is we have the ability to make some of those changes. But again, from our perspective, it always is based on, do the diagnostics support it, right? So we're looking at the sequences. We'll compare them to some of the databases like that ISU provides, right? And looking to see, does it stand out from what the rest of the industry is reporting? And we can break it down by regions and things like this. But then also to get that isolate tested against the different clades of known influenzas that are out there to see if we do have some of that cross-reactivity and, potential for that to provide protection, the potential for the vaccine to provide protection against what you collected from the field. So yeah, we make changes based on how the viruses are changing. We do see some changes over time. This is, pretty familiar to us. And again, I think, it starts with, what Daniel would describe as kind of that advanced diagnostic side. When something doesn't make sense in the field, let's start by, working it up and getting some of those samples into the lab.
Is there any other specialization that you do with customers that, on a customer basis that helps maybe manage that better or even management? The best management is how to reduce maybe your exposure. But what are some other things, strategies you guys do, maybe not per se just with the vaccination?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess we kind of leapfrogged over, if we can prevent exposure to flu, well, then none of this matters. You're exactly right. You can't look past biosecurity of just all the same things that apply to any other disease, whether it's trucks or people or products or gilts or all of those things. Flu specifically, it's one of those things that if anybody goes through PQA certification, they probably just click, yeah, and kind of forget about the part where it talks specifically about flu and how, depending on what flu we're talking about, it is a zoonotic disease, meaning people can give flu to pigs and vice versa. Pigs kind of like to take flu from other things, birds, and so that's one that is probably a bit overlooked. People always ask me, well, I got to take care of my pig. You mean if I'm sick, I'm supposed to not go around my pigs? There's got to be somebody else that can do that job, right? And so both ways, if you're immune suppressed, maybe you don't need to be around the pigs that have flu, or vice versa. So assuming, which can never be assumed, you should always focus on your biosecurity, I guess. If we're in error, assuming we've got the best biosecurity we possibly can, then I think we're into the vaccine and the strains and the specifics. And one of my, I don't know if it's a pet peeve, more of a thing that makes me excited, I guess, is like we were talking about at the beginning, flu, strep, these things that have been around for a while. I think right along with that comes the phrase I hear all the time, we tried vaccinating for that once and it didn't work. Well, what does that mean? What vaccine, how, what strain, was it a match? And I think it's a combination of better understanding of the disease and better tools than even 5, 10, 15 years ago. And it's time to not brush off vaccine strategies because one time you tried and it didn't work. And I think people imagine incorrectly that, well, there's only, there's not that many choices commercially, and autogenous, you have to buy a lot. And, they just kind of brush off that that's really even a tool. And they would be surprised how specific on what scale we can get with vaccines that can be a valuable tool for any producer today. Even if they tried a vaccine, it's time to revisit that topic.
100% agree. I mean, it's we do have a lot in our industry. I feel your pain a little bit trying to have causation, and correlation. We don't always have. We can't always put that together. But sometimes our people do try to connect the dots, and put two things that are totally unrelated and say this is a cause. So it's a tough dynamic we're dealing with out here in the field is because people will see it didn't work and they'll say, well, it was, and when you dive down into it, it was something else they didn't do correctly or they failed. So
I know this is a flu discussion, but it runs hand in hand in my mind with the current E. coli hot topic. Everybody, hemolytic E. coli, drug resistance, and vaccines for E. coli are not talked about that much. Similarly, because, well, E. coli has been around forever and we tried a vaccine once. Our vaccine technology and understanding has come such a long way, same as flu, that we can do a lot better job now than we used to be able to with the tools we have and the way we use them. And if you tell me vaccines didn't work, then I'm just going to say politely, it's because we didn't use them correctly, because there's no question that vaccines work if we have the right one in the right scenario. There's 100% work.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's a tool we need to use more of, and we need to understand a lot of times it's not the vaccine that didn't work. It was the protocol or something that wasn't followed. And your point on biosecurity, we know we've got good plans on paper, but we know we're going to fail many times with those biosecurity plans. And we're going to have disease, and the best we can do is prevent it. But it's going to walk in our facilities, whether we like it or not or choose to it.
Certainly, no amount of protocol or specific vaccine will ever be enough to outweigh if we could have just not been exposed to it in the first place. There's no question about that.
That's right. Very good. Well, and I guess any other topic on vaccines, we're talking about adjuvants and or is some of that to get the right response? How important is that?
Yeah, there's two pieces to any vaccination, right? The first is the antigen, making sure that you got the right bugs in the bottle. The other half of that injection is also the adjuvant. This is the engine that powers the vaccine, right? This is what gets the pig to respond to it and start to elicit that immune response that we're looking for. Again, here's the beauty of an autogenous program is we have some flexibility in what we can use. And based on what's going on in the herds that people are working with, there's different options that are out there. Some of these are better designed to get a stronger response out of viral vaccines. There's many, many different adjuvants out there in the world that are available. And finding one that works well with viral antigens in particular can be immensely critical in the success of a program.
Well, I think we're running out of time here, and I really appreciate you guys' perspective and on vaccines and some of the strategies. And I think producers out here, we're going to be using more vaccines. We've got more diseases that we're worried about. Maybe flu is not on the top. African swine fever, I think everybody's is kind of number one just because of the impact. But it's definitely, I won't say a silent killer, but it's one that it seems, as Daniel said, it seems we've been able to just accept that we're going to have it and maybe not understand that this is something we could manage if we wanted to. And we've got the tools. And as you said, the technology has really moved that these programs work, and we just need to we need to trust the science and really we got people that understand how to manage these. So very good. Well, and we always asked our guests 3 questions. So we'll let you guys double team me today. We had 2 vets and 1 nutritionist, so I got double teamed here. But we had a very cordial conversation. Nobody blamed. We didn't blame each other. So, but maybe thinking, guys, what is your best resource that you use day to day or have used?
I'm going to have to put in the disclaimer first. Hear me out on the full answer, because some educators are going to come up for air. I'm going to say Google. And now let me, people are like, are you kidding me? But the key to a search engine is knowing how to filter the results that it gives you are from valid sources. So I can search, say, a specific flu strain, and then within that, I can compare a vet manual, Iowa State's diagnostic lab, compendium of veterinary products. So there are actual real resources that it's pulling from. So it's somewhat tongue in cheek, but I'll be honest, I still Google a lot of things.
Yeah, for me, it's just the colleagues, right? In our industry, we're fortunate to have many brilliant people around us, and always making sure to reach out and ask the questions, and I'm always just thrilled with the openness of everybody's willingness to share their thoughts and their experiences and what they've learned along the way.
Very good. I've said it 100 times. It's always it's not what you know, it's the people. It's what the people know that you know. So yeah. If you can know good people, you're a phone call between finding an answer or getting somewhere. So,
and I should add that the way I have my computer set up, logged into certain accounts, a Google search for me probably not the same as for everyone else, because I can pull from ASV databases and just as Steve mentioned, from colleagues and publications. And so I would be cautious on how you use the general internet search to get your information.
Very true. Yep. So what would be, just thinking back your career, think about maybe who was your most influential person on your career?
Man, I don't know how much time you have. That's a loaded question. I'll try to go fast.
That's usually a multitude of people.
Yeah,
most people.
I'll go fast. I would say it started with my grandpa. He was my love for animals. And he was important enough to me that I have a son that shares his name. So that's how it all got started. Then I ended up at Purdue, and I don't know if I would be in vet school, maybe not a swine vet, if it wasn't for the late, great Dr. Max Rodeball. And then Daryl Ragland there at Purdue. That's what drove me in the swine vet direction. I was there just in time to piggyback off the coattails of Lou Runnels and Kurt Clark and some of those big swine names. And then as I went on into my career, they gave me a chance at 4-star. I was there in time to learn some from the late Dale Hendrickson. And Mike Pearden was a young vet there that I looked up to and respected. Dr. Dwayne Long gave me a job, and here I am today.
Awesome.
Yeah, for me, the late and great Dr. Bob Morrison was highly influential in my career. Turned me over to the swine side. I did not have swine interest as a veterinarian coming into school, and just consider myself very fortunate to have partnered up with him early on. He then later went on to become the major advisor of my PhD program as well. And so consider myself pretty blessed to have been able to work with him for many, many years and learn from him along the way. So, yeah.
Very good. Yeah. It's always, we're combination of all the experiences, I think, through our life and people. Maybe it's parents, grandparents, to colleagues and, mentors that we have through our career. So we take a little bit from everybody, I think, to make us who we are. Very good. So last question, what do you think are some of the key characteristics or skills that of successful people in your fields?
I would say you've probably heard this answer before. It's cute to say that, but it's got to be true. Is just curiosity and not being complacent. I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing to be a little bit younger in the swine industry, but along with that comes not experience and being in a rut is a pretty fine line. And so not just having that buildup of always having done things the same way, I think that goes hand in hand. Just what we talked about today. I don't have 20 years of trying vaccines that didn't work. And in my era, they do work. And so I think it's important to revisit things that you've maybe have tried before and kind of don't look at it anymore. So don't be complacent. Keep striving to always be better. There is no perfect swine producer. I don't care if you're the top 1%, you can do better. So keep striving.
Yeah. And I would piggyback on that just to say, never be afraid to ask, right? I mentioned it earlier that we're surrounded by brilliant people in this industry and people that truly, truly want to help each other and see each other succeed. So, as a young veterinarian, never being afraid to pick up the phone and call that veterinarian from another practice or reach out to people from the universities or the allied industries and maybe even just find a producer that's been out there and around for a while that has some of that real practical experience, especially for those young veterinarians. You don't graduate knowing all the answers. And so just be brave to reach out to somebody and ask, right? And that's, you'll be shocked at what you can learn from a couple of phone calls.
It's probably not possible for everyone to do, but I will never be thankful enough for when I was young, working on a pig farm, when I was an undergrad working in a pig farm. There's no amount of education that will help you understand what happens in there day to day. Yeah, you just have to have lived it to really get it.
That was a good point. I think that we should all understand. You guys are young guys, but people my age and older, we do tend to have some preconceived ideas. And, when technologies come out, maybe they're different. Today, we've made so many improvements. And so I think having young people out here that are not afraid to try something different or look at something different, I think it's very important to advancing our knowledge. Because a lot of times these older guys, I'm not throwing rocks at older guys, they have a wealth of experiences, but sometimes they do close their mind to, maybe a technology that maybe is not widely accepted, or maybe they have ideas from when that technology first started and some of the bugs that we had to work out. So I think that's a very good point that I appreciate with you guys are young and coming up with new ideas and some of our old guys, maybe we could learn and maybe humble ourselves a little bit that maybe we don't know everything.
Always within reason,
Yeah.
Because my specialty, I think, is the economics. And so it all boils down to what do you expect to have in return? We're not out there wasting people's money on silly, trying new things, unproven. But it's time to rehab that discussion, at least, on if something we should look at. Do we have it?
Yeah, just having an open mind, I think, So, Well, very good. We appreciate you guys being on our podcast today. And I think we've got a little something all producers here can take from our talk today. So
great.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.